Canaanites. Your blood is royal. But why is your blood royal? Because of the actions of what you represent. We judge them by not what they seem, but what they are. We understand that you cannot be a Negro black colored Ethiopian. Because in the eyes of law, they are below the law. They're not even real. They're artificial people created by a corporate construct. And you agreed to be that corporate construct by consensual agreement, by signing your signature, by validating what the statement or claim that they made in behalf of you. This is the reason why the 14th Amendment say any person born or naturalized are subject to the jurisdiction thereof and are citizens in the state in which you reside. When they created that doctrine, they knew what they was doing. This is the reason why they created the 13th Amendment. This is the reason why they reinserted our 13th Amendment prior to the one that was there prior to it. The one that was made in 1810, where it deals with the titles and abilities of who we were. Because they understand when they removed the Republic form of government from this land, they had to remove the titles of the estate of the citizens of this land. That was the whole purpose. Then they took on their titles and abilities. Claim to be noble, but they're not. You are the nobles. You are the lawgivers. But you must deal with the decrees of the Moorish Scientific of America, because this is a vehicle for that. The Moorish Divine Natural Movement was incorporated in the Moorish Scientific of America. So this is a DBA for doing business. This is the name of your national government. Because the prophet said, through your free national name, you are known by the government of the world, according to the same government in which you live in. So we're claiming to be Moorish American. Why? Because we're descendants of Moroccans, but born in America. So how did we get over here in America? Because Morocco still exists as another nation under a whole political structure. So how did the prophet, being a prophet, doing what the prophet does, was a prophet? What's the duty of a prophet? So think about what Noble Johnny did. If Morocco was the first nation to declare America a nation based on the Republic form of government, then this is the only style of government that it could be. Because you were here prior to them coming here. You were reclassified as Native American, but native just simply means native to the land. A true American. You are the true American. They just adopted your name. They be classified as a true American. If you look it up in the unabridged dictionary, it will tell you that you are the copper people. He didn't say black, he said copper. I mean, I would choose a better word, another word as well, but even that within themselves, just to note that we are not black. Question.
It's kind of ambiguous. It specify what kind of people, what their nationality. They are Americans. Let's give you a clue. That's what a lot of dictionaries give you, kind of like true or false. You know, they have to do different research. There's different dictionaries. Compare. I think that's interesting that it does mention copper. And if you notice, penny, which is copper. And if you notice the other coin, the quarter, the dime, the nickel, penny is the only one that's copper. And the face is different directions, the face of the other. So it goes back to the emancipation of slavery, and the trade like that. It's very interesting, comment, and how it relates to us.
get past the name. If we can get past the name, we can move forward. You know, going back to the administration of Abraham's administration, he understood that the way the government was going was a work of European psychology. They had to alter what was already destined in nature, according to nature's God, according to nature's law. That's another handwriting. Go ahead.
Predestined constitutional law that was enforced so the fact that they were practicing slavery, you know, was affecting their members that were being certain legal rights, such as life being so the fact that they were still slavery being practiced, meaning that it was unconstitutional. It was, they were not living according to their own state. So Lincoln tried to correct, you know, saying, well, this is unconstitutional. Going against what we said. What we tried to establish. So it's interesting that even the combat was working. You know, they just
Who's nature? Nature. Yes, sir? No, there's somebody else. I think somebody else was talking until he set up the computer and stuff. The last movie.
Calling out on the beat to all citizens we all have to be cognizant of this thing, be intelligent of what we're talking about when we're saying that we're not right.
We want to be outset. We can't be afraid of the truth. We can't be afraid of the truth. That's why I'm doing more scientific than so, but we got to stop believing. There's a part of the process. We got to stop. We got to move forward. Faithful man knows to be the truth, and man is convinced of becoming that truth. So we believe that we were more Samaritan, that we were born. Then we came to a form that brought in the faith of being more, because we have the curriculum, we have the standards, we have the principles. But we don't want to go past that. We don't want to move into fruition. Becoming who we say we are. Because we just remember what they say, but what you are. Though Charlie understood that. If you've been in this movement since and have the 7 acts, then there's no reason for their non-compliance to this law. Because we are trying to advance ourselves to that of the faithful. Circle 7, perfection. We're here trying to perfect ourselves. Prophet said you only get strong as your weakest link. When they have their meetings, there's no missing link. You going to conform to the script, or you're not going to be part of the script. What happened if they're having an acting debut and everybody going for the part? If you can't fit the script, you don't get the part. So Look Daddy gave you 7 acts, part of the script, that you got to play your part. Right? So this is our job. So when I first came into this movement, my thing to be part of the part was to start asking questions. So before I yield my position, I know there's a couple of questions from those in the congregation across the river, those who just came in. I know those who have been here are aware of why we're not in the Black movement. But like I said, we have a form of social mechanism, strength. Thought must be developed by the exercise of strength. So just a couple of questions are from the people on the floor who just come into the movement as guests. Answering your own understanding. Just to understand why you're here the Moor Scientific Level. Or if there are any questions that you need to answer with regards to the purpose of why the Moor Scientific Level, it's time to do that.
Islam, Moors.
Islam.
Oh, Islam. Thank you for being an assistant Grand Sheikh. You want to provide for attention. Islam, we're going to move forward now for part 2 of our segment here that we do every second Sunday with our Canaanland family. So, Moors in Canaanland, which is also known as corporate terms, Canada, North America, Islam. Islam. So we're going to go right into law enforcement. Now, for those who have a Due Process of Law Volume 2 book, it's a workbook, looks like this. If you have it handy, I'm going to be drawing from this. Page 64, this is our protocol, active protocol handbook. These are like sort of like the spark plugs to the more divine and national movement. Help get you to your destination. Islam?
Islam.
You with me, everything, love?
Yeah, everything's good, Mar.
Islam.
Everything's good.
Hold on a second.
Islam.
Was there a statement or any question before I went forward?
No more, go ahead.
All right, please. All right, so I'm drawing from the Due Process of Law book, Volume 2, and I'm reading a law enforcement code of ethics. Islam. It says, as a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve mankind, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and the peaceful against violence or disorder, and to respect the constitutional rights of all men to liberty, equality, and justice. I will keep my private life unsoiled as an example to all men and maintain courageous calm in the face of danger, scorn, or ridicule, develop self-restraint, and to be constantly mindful of the welfare of others. Honest in the thought and deed in both my personal and official life. I will be exemplary in obeying the laws of the land and regulations of my department. Whatever I see or hear of a confidential nature,
or that is confided to me in my official capacity will be kept ever secret unless revelation is necessary in the performance of my duty. I will never act officially or permit personally feelings, prejudice, animosities, or animosities, or friendships to influence my decisions. With no compromise for crime, with relentless prosecution of criminals, I will enforce the law courageously and appropriately without fear or favor, malice, ill will, never employing unnecessary force or violence, and never accepting, what is this term? Gratuities, Islam. I recognize the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith. I repeat, I recognize the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith, and I accept as a public trust to be held so long as I'm true to the ethics of the police service. I will constantly strive to achieve these objectives and ideals, dedicating myself before God to my chosen profession, law enforcement. Islam?
Islam.
Love.
Now, this is what you refer to as the code of ethics, and this is for law enforcement, even though it made reference to the police officer, because once, just to bring everybody up to speed, an officer is one who holds a public office, first and foremost. Don't just look at officer as a police officer. Term officer is more broader than that. In order to be an officer, that means you have to hold office. It's a difference. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have an office with a desk and a chair in it to be an officer. You're talking about a public trust when you talk about officer or an official. That's one who has an allegiance to the public trust. And when we talk about government, you also make reference to the term trust, because government is a trust. So what we do under the republic form of government is we entrust in people, meaning that we choose people to become a representative over the best interest of our trust. And our trust is our government, one and the same. So those that are elected into office, or those who are even appointed into office to hold an official capacity in your and our government, are also termed officers, because they hold the public's trust. The trust is given to them by you, by us, under the form we call republic form of government, also termed chosen representatives. The chosen representatives are also trustees. So I just want to bring this down to everybody. We have new members here as well, new people. We want to make sure everybody's up to speed when we start talking about the public trust and we start talking about law enforcement and the word officer. We need to know where this comes into play at. And we're going to be breaking down the different components of officers and how they're derived. How did they become known as officers? If we go back into the last portion of this paragraph, it says, I recognize the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith. Public also is referred to as people. So when you hear the term public or republic, we have a republican form of government. The root word, etymology speaking, goes back down to pub, public. Public goes to the root word pub. Pub means people. So when you say public, you're just saying people. It's the same exact word. So this is a public government. meaning it's a people's government. So this, the power is derived from the people. That's what the difference with republic form of government means. The power derives from the people. The trust comes from the people. Holy Quran tells us, or the Prophet tells us, that they place their trust upon names and issues formed by who? Formed by their forefathers. So trust is based on our forefathers' consent on agreement to whatever systematic form or policy, statute, etc. that our forefathers have created, whatever predates the present in the formula of government or government structure is known as the trust. So it's the agreement that predates our present system. It actually comes from our forefathers. We were speaking earlier about the Barbary Treaty. And we were speaking about how it mentions the fact that this government here was not founded based on Christianity. It was founded based on Islam. So that's just another proof or tools that you would use in explaining that this system, this current modern day government structure we have today, is derived from Muslim customary law. That's one of your proofs. That the Muslim customary law is also referred to as common law. The common law is the common trust that comes from our forefathers. So our forefathers, known as Moors, are also known as Moroccans, are also known as Muslims, also known as Barbaries, and Saracens going all the way back, going back into whatever names that you want to utilize or use, Moabites, Moors, etc. Our forefathers predated the modern day system or system of law, and that's what creates the common law. So you can use it interchangeably when you say Muslim customary law or common law, you're talking about the same system of law. Now when they start talking about, when I'm talking about they, I'm talking about Europeans and other peoples in the court systems today, when they start making reference to common law, they're going to tell you the common law is derived from English mandates or courts or judge rulings, judgments, orders that was entered into a court of law in the English system and been adopted and utilized here. And they say that though that system of law that has been already ruled is referred to as common law, or what they might say the common law of England. And you need to know that there's a difference between that. Islam. Emmanuel, you had your hand up before?
Yeah, the term officer. So, an officer would have to be someone who's actually voted by the people.
Yes, and I'm glad you raised that question because I know it's in the form of a statement as well, but that's part of the segment where I was going with this particular demonstration here. But when you properly or to lawfully use the term officer, technically means that one has to be entrusted by the people. Usually in the format of an election, or also it can be in the form of an appointment. But even when it's done through appointment, it has to be done by those who have the authority established by the government to appoint someone into an office. So the reason why we're bringing this up is so that you know who's an officer and who's not an officer by definition and by law, not just by a title. Because now when you start saying a police officer, not to discredit the term, but a police officer by law is a police officer who's elected. Or a police officer that was deputized by one who was elected. So now when you understand this terminology here on what's an officer and who's an officer, you'll realize that your local police officers are actually agents or employees of the municipality and where they're employed at. And the municipality themselves is referred to as quasi-governments and not official governments or lawful government. Therefore, that they're just employees and they're not elected or appointed. They're hired to take on the duties of that particular municipality. So they become agents of the municipality or security guards for the municipality or agents for the municipality or the city, the borough, etc., which are private corporations and they're quasi in nature and not technically officers. So by definition, a police officer is one who is elected. The only elected police officers in your government are your county sheriffs. And there's one per county. And then he deputizes agents to act on his behalf because he can't take on the whole county by himself. So he has to deputize others to assist him or her. Which is, constitutionally speaking, a police officer.
Question.
Yes, sir.
When the quasi law enforcement exercise or violate the people's rights, are we able to call them officer in our claims to hold them to constitutional law, or should we just keep calling them quasi?
I would call them who they are. They're quasi, demi officers. Because that doesn't say that they are a constitutional, so but it's letting them know that they are alleging to be an officer, which has two folds to it. Because constitutionally we know that they don't hold office, but because they are alleging to do so, then they're still held to the same accountability and integrity and transparency that a police officer holds. He's still entitled to do that and hold that within that same faith and trust as he said he would. That's what the oath of office says. Follow what I'm saying?
Right.
By calling them demi or quasi in nature lets the court know that you are aware of who they are, and also it makes them show cause on who they are, because if they don't like the terminology, then they should challenge it.
Right.
So what it does, it pretty much puts it in a proper perspective for consideration purposes, but also it invites them to open the door to somewhere they don't want to go with it, which they're not going to really open that door. But keeping it knowledgeable and keep it cognizable, you want to let them know that you are aware and you're conscious of who they are. So yes, you always word them as being demi or quasi.
So wording them as demi and quasi doesn't disqualify their obligations in law enforcement with regard to their oaths and things like that.
You mean, does it neutralize?
Yeah, does it neutralize? Right. By calling them quasi.
No, it doesn't. Because like I said, regardless of what we pull out of here, they're not going to change what they're doing. Because the state all the way up to the Supreme Court actually backs them in their position. And it's to their best interest to keep these people in that capacity to do what they're doing. So they're not going to really change that. So under threat to arrest and coercion, we have no choice but to keep dealing with them in the capacity that they're in. So even though that they're going to continue to be who they are, we still are pretty much acknowledging that we know that that's not going to change, and they got guns and they still going to police the neighborhood, and we know that that's not going to change anytime soon. But for constitutional purposes, you're letting them be aware that you're not asleep, and you're only accepting that position to correct the rest of the herd. And what you're also doing is making the sheriff more aware that you know what his obligation is, and asking for him to step up so that you don't have to go through these mistreatments.
And with regard to the sheriff, is that from the perspective of the obligation of the?
I lost your voice, man.
That was my bad. I was on mute.
All right.
With regard to the sheriff, letting the sheriff know that we recognize his position and the positions that are subordinate to him. That is directly the responsibility of the heads of the temple or whatever jurisdiction that is over a body of Moors, or should individuals do that as well to make sure they contact the sheriff and let him know that we know what the law is or the jurisdiction of law?
It should be the duty of your acting officer of your body politic, i.e. your Grand Chief, Wazir, Amir, etc. It's the duty of that individual who has been chosen amongst our domestic government to go before those who are chosen and elected on the other side of the government. And you get a favorable response that way. And plus, that individual with the title, even from our side, should be intelligent in those subjects of law where they can have an intelligent conversation with that acting officer. We don't want anyone who's just proclaimed just going to have a conversation where they might not be educated to do so. Islam. And also within body politics, you know, some of us use the term mufti, some of us use the term sergeant at arms, or whatever we call our head of security and our security force. That's also something that individual should be versed in, is knowing that aspect of the law from a law enforcement perspective. Because when we say, we're coming from a temple jurisdiction, and we say Mufti force is the same as law enforcement. So therefore, the head or chief Mufti, or whatever term you give that person as a head of your security force, that person should be versed in the constitutional law of his office, where you can send that individual down to deal with the sheriff or the sheriff's deputy, because now it'd be more appropriate than just Grand Chief or Assistant Grand Chief or someone going down there who might be dealing with multiple different hats. It'll be somebody that's job specific going down there to deal with that related issue.
All right.
And put them on notice as well, also verbally, but also through literature and affidavits on what this is all about. And if there's anything dealing with right to travel or affidavits pertaining to that, or tags, identification, then that sheriff should be put on notice during that meeting of what capacity you're operating in and what type of identification that your membership uses, etc. That way it's no surprise to them, and they have a database on what's authenticated on our side, what it looks like, who's using it, with names, identifications, and everything associated with it, so it's no surprise. That way, when individuals do encounter any issues down the line, they'll start to call them and say, well, okay, we're arresting you for apprehension of your own identification, and you got stolen governmental identification and all this other crap that we have been known to get charged with. A lot of these things could really come to an end if it was done in a proper manner before more start going out traveling with these credentials.
All right, Mark, give thanks.
So,
Give thanks, Mark.
Islam. Sure.
Islam, just to come back on what you were saying, in regards to titles, as an officer shows you have an official capacity. So we understand, like we were speaking earlier about, you know, the Constitution, Article 169, pursuant to the original 13th Amendment, speaks about titles of ability. So when you're dealing with a particular officers, you must go in according to law, it means it's a title. And some titles are, like I said, are considered courtesy titles. Some are substantive titles, which means that they were allocated or designated by law. And some aren't allocated or designated by law. Like for instance, like you said, some officers are de facto, some are de jure. You know what I'm saying? So the distinction has to be made in regards to where they get these titles that were placed upon them.
Islam. Absolutely. And also pointing out, Islam, more.
Islam.
Islam.
Yeah, so just to clarify and to make that connection, over here, the Toronto Police Corporation, they have a board of trustees which is appointed by the province, and it's not elected. So the question is it similar over there as far as it related to the state being appointed by some elected officials in the state? And if so, what do you suggest, or what's the power of influence based on the fact that the people who run the organization are appointed by people who are elected by the public, so-called. So, in other words, the responsibility is sort of being brought back to the people, but without the people being able to affect it directly.
Islam, and that's a twofold question and answer, and that's a good one as well. But see, here's what occurs is, even the fact that these people are appointed and not elected still is a replica of the mindset of the people, of the general citizenship.
Right.
Because yes, they're doing it and they're getting away with it, but it's only because the people allow them to do that.
Right.
So it's hard to just go in there and change the way the system operates without changing the set of the people. You know, so that really becomes our job on both sides, even here. Because a lot of things that's being done, remember, we know that they went from the public sector to the private sectors. And the result of that is universal all around the board now, where the public law hold more of a public's influence. Where the Constitution said this, the Constitution said that. So that's more of a public law. Because that was the agreed upon by the people and our forefathers from day one. Now, when they try to eliminate the public and the constitutional way of doing things, they get more from a democratic perspective, where they start dictating how the policy will go from this point, because now they're starting to deal with private policy. So therefore, the people are really letting them get away with it. They're like now they pick and choose when they want to use the Constitution. And they only get away with that because the people at large is still asleep. They're still allowing them to do that. Where our job is, it's hard for us to just go in there and say, well, you can't do that because the Constitution says you're supposed to be doing it this way. Although we can do that, but we know our voice is limited on that level. So our greater voice is by educating the people to start collectively making that statement versus a couple of us making that statement. That's the way we deal with that particular issue. Now, you can get a favorable reply by writing them, letting them know what the organic law stipulates when it comes down to their appointments, and still hold them to what they're supposed to do constitutionally. Now, what it will do, it might not change what they do 100%, but it will also make them consider more of what you want or what you need to do business from a Moorish perspective. Like, for example, a group of our Moors have been going to the county clerk's office regularly, or well, I would say to the board of director meetings for the town, to what they call the town hall meetings. And they've been going there consistently every meeting.
and they've been actually taking a stand and voicing their opinions at law pertaining to the constitutionality of the county, the board of directors, the freeholders, even to the county clerk's position, the filing of documents. They taking it back to the 1800s of the manumission of the slaves, and they letting them know every week that there's a meeting that we're not going to tolerate you burying this and you not fulfilling your fiduciary and constitutional obligation at law. So letting them know we on your tail is basically what they've been doing. So although that they can't change what they're doing overnight, but what they're doing is informing the other citizens that's there and letting the other citizens know what the constitutional obligation of these board of directors really are and really is. So that's going to make them be more consciousness now of what their role of a citizen should be. So these are just tools and weapons we can use to start addressing the question that you asked on things that we can challenge indirectly without necessarily doing it directly.
And I would agree, and I would say that just to clarify, when you say that we as Moors go in on a weekly basis and you let citizens know, you're talking about the general population, other people, other nationalities, and all the people of that community where you reside.
Absolutely, because great statement, because like I inform the Moors here all the time, it's not about us directly, although it affects us, and we're really there because of some issues that, you know, they don't want to honor our nationality and our birthright. Let's keep it real. But you don't want to take that position from a domestic perspective because you're a part and parcel to the government. So therefore, you want to act always on behalf of a concerned citizen. Because once you start getting into being part and parcel, even though Moorish American is just your nationality that you're proclaiming, that just shows your roots and your descent. But your obligation and allegiance is to the constitutional construction of this land here. So therefore, you got a constitutional obligation, and you're not just there based on a group, national origin, religion, etc. You're there on behalf of the law. So you take that position. And whoever else joins you within their national origin and affiliation, religion, etc., just is added ammunition to the argument and the complaint. But as soon as you go there making a Moorish American argument or making it seem like you're arguing on behalf of a group, then you're put into the category of a group, and now your argument becomes limited to a group because you made it that way. When therefore the issues that we're really addressing really has no discrimination towards national origin or religion. That's why the prophet said don't even make it a religious issue or religious controversy, because it's not about that. It's about the law. Regardless of what your religious belief is, the argument here is still the same. If we're agreeing to be citizens of a national constitution, we become one family bearing one free national name. So your religious faith becomes irrelevant to that cause. In fact, whatever your religious faith is should be neutral and should be agreeable with the argument itself. So it doesn't matter if I say I'm a Muslim and you say you're a Christian, we still need to come together on this same issue right here. And we need to agree on the same issue. That means your religion and my religion should have the same interest in this direction here pertaining to the constitutional law. Once our religion starts being different in opinion based on the constitutional law, then there's something wrong with the religion. It's not universal anymore. And that's something that you should keep in mind whenever we're dealing with issues of law pertaining to any land that we're in. The constitutional government becomes the religion first. And if your religion that you proclaim, it has a different opinion towards the constitutional law of the land, then that means you got a foreign religion, and your religion is not universal. As Muslims and as members of the Moorish Science Temple, we say that we believe in one God and one religion. So if we really say that, then that means that our religion is one and universal with all other religions. The minute the religious faith differs is because the religion is not pure on somebody's part. And you don't want to bring that to a constitutional argument, because it shows elementary in the understanding of religion. So when they start talking about, when they open their meetings up talking about one God, then you don't want to look at one God as something that their religion is dealing with, or it has nothing to do with the First Amendment when they say that. Because one God is universal and is pure in thought and in government. So you start to categorize that one God into a religious proclamation of faith, then you're wrong. And that's not what they meant by that. Islam.
Islam. And under the spirit of the Republic form of government, Article 464, which guaranteed every state in the Union Republic form of government, and also in regards to a law enforcement officer who holds an office because of being elected according to that Constitution or the National Constitution, as you read, paraphrasing from the actual law enforcement ethics of code, it says, I recognize that the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith, and I accept it as a public trust to be held so long as I am true to the ethics of the holy service. I will constantly strive to achieve these objectives and ideals, dedicating myself before God to my chosen profession of law enforcement. If we read Article 4, Section 1, which is the same article which guarantees the public form of government, Article 4, Section 1 says, full faith and credit should be given in the state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state. And the Congress may by general law prescribe the manner in which such acts, records, and proceedings should be proved and the effects thereof. So what they're saying is that even in this present day, when they take their oath of office, it's to the republic form of government. Because that's what the full faith and credit comes upon.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. That is the trust. And trust is based off your words and your agreement, also known as consent, is what you agreed to be, what you agreed the law to be. And that's what the nature of the Constitution is about, your agreement and your consent. So it's a contract, because contracts make laws. Remember, anytime you start talking about that general loose term used law is only based off contract. Islam.
Article 4, Section 1 also back up the proclamation when we look at full faith credits, how we do it. Go to the record. So we claim county clerk's office letter. That's one of the missions right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Islam. Is there any more hands before I continue? No,
You could explain the office of the sheriff. What does it stand for? Just the term sheriff and his badge over there, the symbol over there.
All right, good question. He asked, for those who couldn't hear, he asked to explain the intent, I should say, and the duty and the role of a sheriff. That was Brother Emmanuel's question. And now what I'm going to ask, so it doesn't be opinionated or guessing, Sheikhs, can you look online? And we can, every sheriff should be universal, but it might change up a little bit with language. But just pick any sheriff, so you can do a local sheriff's office or anywhere throughout the sister states. If you go to the sheriff's website, or go to your county government, and click on the tab for sheriff's office, within there, they all have their websites now, and on it should have their preamble. And the preamble will describe the intent of that office, of that sheriff. Because remember, anybody who works for the sheriff's, on the sheriff's office is working under his badge and license number. Also his bond.
sheriff per county?
Yes, there's only one elective sheriff
Need some numbers off your phone.
per county.
They still got my phone.
Elected sheriff. You only elect one sheriff. Now, he's reserves the right, and he's given the right to deputize or appoint other sheriffs that act on his behalf. Yeah, they're under the sheriff. But they're deputized, meaning they're lawfully speaking. I'm using this term because in law, this is what you need to know, and this is how you should verbalize it. They're deputized. So, you know, if I always give this old analogy going back to the old TV program Dukes of Hazzard. Everybody remember that from back in the day? Yeah. And remember, they implement these TV programs here in the form of entertainment, but also they have educational tools to them. Then now we can go back and look at these things as adults, as conscious mortals now, and you'll start to look at the role that Roscoe played. Remember, it was like the bad cop, the cops and robbers type situation. There's always a polarity, good and bad, good and evil. So you had the Dukes of Hazzard, remember, and there's so much science in that. But just, not to take up too much time, but the Dukes. Now, Duke is a foreign title used in England. You have Dukes and Earls, and that's also in the Constitution. We'll go back to that later. But you got the Dukes of Hazzard. The particular county was referred to as Hazzard County. Right? Now, yes, the Dukes of Hazzard, the Dukes of the county of Hazzard County. Now, the sheriff was Roscoe. Y'all remember that? Yes. But, of course, and they was playing them, but at the same time, the jurisdiction of the county, he was the chief police officer of the county. He was the man, lawfully speaking, constitutionally speaking, he was the man. He was elected by the town people, i.e. the county's people, to be the sheriff. He has the only arresting powers in the county. No one else does. Yes.
Is the sheriff, the title sheriff, denote to Sharif?
Yes. The word sheriff is just a modern day term in this English dialect language as the Sharif. That's what the sheriff is. Sharif. Also go back to Islam as the Sharif or the Sharia. Sharif, which all derives from the term law. So the sheriff is the law. That's what that means. So Sharif means law. So as Moors, we say that we are the Sharifs. Or even the term mufti that you hear is also Sharif, which means law. Law enforcers is why you refer to them as mufti. Why that term is always used with people in a military capacity or security or policing capacity, because it deals with enforcement of the law. So they become law enforcers. That's why you hear that term or see that term synonymously used in law. That's why I hold that door for me. Yeah, mission statement is fine as well. Mission statement of the sheriff, she's about to read.
To protect and serve the citizens of the county of Monmouth, New Jersey, in an effective and efficient manner through the wise use and management of all resources.
And so on. Okay, that's one. But that will differ throughout different sheriff departments. They will all have their own mission statement or their own preamble, etc. Now, there's a text that I will it's hard to get because it's old, but we do have them, and we can let you read it. It's called the Treatise of the Sheriff. And this is an ancient text, a treatise on the duties of a sheriff. Stand corrected, is the correct name of it. The duties of the sheriff. This is an old common law treatise of literature that we found years ago on the office of the sheriff, and it explains it in detail, accurate, to the point. To the fact that we used it in communication with the local sheriffs. Because a lot of them don't even know that in its full scope. Because nowadays the sheriff takes their orders from the state. So the state outlines the orders of that office and gives them a job description or things that they should do as sheriffs. As far as they deal with county corrections, courthouses, anything dealing with the county courts is the sheriff's jurisdiction as far as security, and then dealing with real estate, things of that nature in the county. So they outline things that they're supposed to do, child support, etc. And now they have all these other positions of police officers that takes the real job description away from the sheriff, and it gives it to people like the marshals, the prosecutors, the police department, which all of this is recent. Yeah, internal affairs, which is really a sheriff's jurisdiction. So just saying that, throwing this out there to you, is that when you have issues at law, and just because they say that the marshal or the prosecutor is the one who deals with this, look at that as modern day speaking. Don't be afraid to exercise the constitutionality of who really supposed to deal with that. You can summons the sheriff to deal with some of these issues. Regardless of what he does on his paycheck time, or what he's told in his manual he's supposed to do it, you can show him what the true manuals say about these issues. And it's still his jurisdiction to deal with. Prosecutor is not elected. Who holds more authority than the one who's elected? So therefore, you can't let someone tell you that the prosecutor holds more lawful jurisdiction than a sheriff when it comes to certain issues. You can't say that the police department has more power than the sheriff. Constitutionally, it don't make sense, and anybody who states that shows that they're either agents or don't know their position at law. And that could be challenged. Well, it's lost. You got a couple hands up before this, brother.
On that note, in regards to the word sheriff, or what the word sheriff means, it's beautiful, because if you look at the Sultan who signed the treaty with the United States of America in 1786, his name was Sidi Sharif Abdul Muhammad III. You know what I'm saying? So it just shows you that particular name was there. You know what I'm saying? And sheriff goes back to the word law. And also to make reference to the movie Django, when you notice when he called the marshal, then he shot the marshal and he called the sheriff, because the sheriff was the law of the land.
Yes, that's a good example. Absolutely. The movie Django you're talking about, how it was all about slave and capacity of the slave, remember? And how when in the movie called Django, but when he ride on a horse, that was like the slaveholders was looking at like, not on my plantation. What do you say? Not around my niggas. You see what I'm saying? But it's in the mindset of what he was trying to explain to you, where the European told him, he says, Django not a slave, he's a free man. And because he's a free man, it gives him the right and the jurisdiction to exercise the fact that he can ride where he wants on a horse. Because he's a free man and he has the status to do it, i.e. he's a Moor. Is what he was actually telling him in the movie. Instead of saying he was a Moor, he just used the term, he's a free man. Because there's two different statuses. You're either a slave or a free man. That's it. Nowadays, they just use a bunch of terminology to use to explain the status of the individual. So you either Negro, nigger, black, corporate, person, you know, they got all these names that mean slave. Where back then it was either you were just a slave or a free man. They didn't have all this technology to induce you into the jurisdiction. It was clear, either a slave or free man. So to the other slaves, remember, they called him a free man because in their minds that's who he was, and that's what justified why they had to do what the master say do, and he didn't have to. He can go in the house with them and eat and do whatever he wants and sit down at the table and talk business. Why? Because he's a free man. So in their minds, that satisfied or justified why they dealt with him that way. And this is what we have to do in the minds of our people. When they want to know why you walk around with that in their minds, that hat on, or why you got that ID, why you do things this way is the same way you explain it to them. Not just that I'm a Moor, because they're Moor too. That doesn't really explain it. But it's saying I'm a Moor and my status is that of a free man. And I bet you get a different response from it. Because when you say Moor, they still look at that as a group, or a club, or a religion, or they start in their minds classifying you separate from themselves. And it really doesn't explain it. It still becomes confusing to who you are and who they are. When you just let them know, point blank, I'm a free man. Now you'll understand what the Freedmen's Bureau was all about. And why they called it the Freedmen's Bureau. So now you'll understand also the Moors divine and national movement. What did Drew says? What did he say? Help me to save my people. Get them back into the constitutional fold of government. They have fallen from the constitutional laws of government, meaning that their status is a slave.
It's not.
So to get back into the constitutional fold is to proclaim your freedom.
Hold it.
Yeah, let's click the thing on the mic.
Islam.
Over here, they're very antsy when they hear free man. In fact, when you say, like you said, I'm a Moor plus I'm a free man, they'll delete Moor and run on the whole free man thing and get you into
Sovereignty.
In sovereignty.
You said they'll link you to sovereignty?
Yeah, because there's a lot of Europeans here running on the Moorish information, talking about the free man of the land.
Yes, and that's because a lot of the Europeans who are declaring their freedom or their sovereignty, as they would call it, under what they call a sovereignty movement,
right.
A lot of them use that terminology, free man.
Right.
And it's because of what I'm saying that free man is a lawful term that links, remember, sovereignty is the status that a nation holds.
Right.
And if you are a citizen of that particular free nation, then you're automatically sovereign because your nation is sovereign. So an individual is not really a sovereign without holding the status of his nation. So that term I don't really like to use because they monopolize that term. And when you start talking about the sovereignty movement or sovereignty people, or that's what you're doing, then they categorize that to what those Europeans are doing.
Exactly.
So you don't want to stay away from that. The nation is sovereign. By saying that I'm a citizen of the free national government automatically means you sovereign. You shouldn't have to say that. So you shouldn't have to get into an individual statement about sovereignty. It's already clear when you declare who you are. It should be. Now, part two of that, the word free man is a touchy subject because it clears up very quickly your status. That pertains more to the individual status right away. And they know that. So now they're probably, because it has so much weight in it, they probably try to detour people from using it. Try to get on you real quick, try to put brakes on you using that term real quick because of the power behind it. You know, where I'm not suggesting as Moors, I mean, here they don't really ride that much, but if you're saying they do that out in Canaanland, then I will probably critique that argument a little bit just so that then you don't get classified with what the other groups are doing out there. But you can use that simultaneously with the fact that you're a free national being. I like that term because Professor Drew used it, and still to this day, a lot of people that's trying to mimic what he's doing don't really use that terminology. The free national government and free national standards and all this term dealing with the free national republic. You don't hear people talk like that. So because of that, I like to use that just because, number one, he instructed us to use it, and two, it must be some type of power behind that verbiage that means something different in status than what the average person or citizen is accustomed to saying and thinking. So I like to keep it, I keep it just like how he put it. You don't really hear the prophet use the term sovereignty at all. So for us to be using that redundantly really means that we're not mimicking what he's doing, and two, there might be some legal ramifications behind it. So to me, it's not suggested that we should use that term too much anyway. Just to clear up concepts, yes, or to teach somebody real quick and then come off of it, maybe. But I wouldn't redundantly use that, especially in affidavits, etc., in corresponding reports, in documents and identification. I wouldn't really use that term. It's not necessary. Islam. Hold on, brother. Islam, brother, you got the floor.
Yes. How about the term indigenous and part and parcel to the land? Is that a better?
Well, all depending on what you're saying and doing. We are Aboriginal, indigenous to the land.
Right.
I wouldn't never use the word indigenous without qualifying it.
For sure.
Because of that legal ramification as well. For teaching purposes more, I would use Aboriginal, indigenous to teach people who they are, because everybody thinks we came over here on slave ships. So to clear that up, I will use it, but far as a status, it's still a monopolized term that's used and classified term used in law here, and that doesn't really best describe us either.
So when speaking to a policy enforcer, how do we convey to them that we're not in the jurisdiction status-wise?
Well, yeah, you wouldn't, remember, they don't really understand the organic, or what we call the native laws that well anyway.
Right.
Because they're not used to dealing with, I would say, just outside of the Moors realm. Now they only know that language to be for those who are tribal affiliated. So therefore, they're, especially in the inner cities, they're not used to dealing with tribal people too much.
True.
Most of them are reserved to what they call the rural areas or reservations.
Right.
So inner city police don't really deal with tribal people that much. So now when you start talking about Moors, although that we are tribal, but that's still not a term that we want to use too much, because you say tribal to them, and then they start thinking Indian and the classification of tribal. So when we're talking to our people, we have to talk to them a little bit different than we would talk to the police officers or people in government, law enforcement agencies, because you're still talking two different languages.
Right.
So I would just mimic like the verbiage that we use, the verbiage that the prophet gave us. I would just use that and just qualify that, even if they don't understand, you just qualify to them what that means. You know, tell them that you're parcel to the government.
Okay.
Because at that point, he don't really understand how you part and parcel anyway. All arguments is not for the police department. Remember, their position is not to judge the law anyway. That's not their job. They can't. So at the time of the, say for encounter with a police officer, i.e. traffic stop, you can't go through all of that vast information with them. They don't have time, you don't have time, and it's not even their jurisdiction to judge it. Sometimes you have to give them just information they can relate to and let them do their job, regardless of what that might be. Your argument comes with other lawful agencies after the fact. But you can't expect them to comprehend everything you're saying at a traffic stop anyway.
Indeed.
So that's why certain terminology is not even necessary and relevant at that time, because they're trained too, according to the Homeland Security Act. They're trained for certain terminology according to the Patriot Move. So therefore, if you start mimicking certain words that's been taught to them in their classes, they're going to categorize you according to the Patriot Move and deal with you according to that jurisdiction. And you don't want that either. Islam? Islam.
Islam. I think a good proof of thought is to actually get luck from the American Bar Association as well, because a lot of the injuries that our people are cured is from these people who are unofficial and dedicated to this authority. And we understand the American Bar Association, which true purpose was to advocate for the jurisprudence here in America. But because of the African Americans wasn't allowed to 1925, this shows you that even in their act of maintaining jurisprudence, they were de facto in nature. This is the reason why we created the National Bar Association. But when they started going into the Bar Association or anything with under that disguise or demise, it kind of gave our people a remedy, but at the same time the remedy wasn't a right remedy, because even though we were trying to receive due process in our particular form, we were still getting the bulk of the idea because it was actually created by them. So it's, like I said, the original, they were called barristers. Now, barristers were actually the ones who came from over in England. They started over in England. But it's just shown you by the curation of the Bar Association and the basis of jurisprudence. This is the reason why the African Americans, or so-called Negroes, created the National Bar Association to combat what they were doing, because in 1937, the American Bar Association changed to the National League of Great Britain, which deals with those ties with Great Britain. So it shows you how, even in our conscious state as Asiatics, we still was kind of combat the so-called de facto-ness in regards to this geographical location that was going on over here.
Islam, brother Earl?
I wanted to reiterate what you said as far as we don't have to let people know we're sovereign. The Moors nation is a sovereign nation. So in our dealings and communication, I think it's important for us not to have to bring up that topic, that we're sovereign, because that kind of, like you said, shows the level of your mind, and saying, well, we're Moors. So that comes with it. So there's no reason for us to have to just keep like reminding others.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, we have to know that that's the status that comes within us.
Yeah, with the government.
We are the government. So we are the sovereign. We are the true sovereign.
Yes.
It's almost like if the de facto police officer are you sovereign? Then technically you can say, well, yeah, I'm part of the sovereign nation. But like you're saying, we don't have to,
explain it. Yes, absolutely. I agree.
Nothing else to say beyond that. But then I just wanted to bring up the issue to ask, okay, if there is a situation in which someone gets a ticket and wants to combat the ticket,
challenge the ticket.
Or challenge,
use that term legally.
I challenge the ticket. would it be wise to get the county sheriff involved in that you're challenging the ticket?
Yes, you should.
Okay.
And the reason why is because the question was, if there's a traffic stop or a person is cited for a traffic violation, should you get the county sheriff involved? And the answer is yes. And let me explain that. All depending on what level you're on and what you're trying to do. Until you develop yourself, because the sheriff is not just because you let him know, he's not going to come down here and regulate what's going on. We used to call the sheriff out to a traffic stop, but that's a whole nother level. But once again, that's when you get to that point where you can exercise that and you know how to communicate with the sheriff. You don't want to just do it just because I said it's the law, all right, because it can work against you as well. But technically speaking, the police department or officers are acting within a quasi-nature of even stopping someone for a traffic violation. Traffic itself is not constitutional. Traffic court and traffic violations, I would say citations, are actually statutes. They're derived from the state statutes annotated, which comes from the state legislature. The Constitution in its organic form does not support traffic. Here in New Jersey is referred to as Title 39 of the state statute annotated. The Constitution doesn't support that. So when you get into the infractions and the actions of traffic, it's all based on contract law. And it's all based off the agreement that an individual makes with their state. It's only enforceable on the wards of the states. So they only can enforce the traffic violations on a corporate ward member of that state through agreements. Everybody hear what I'm saying? Through the agreement of being a ward of the state, you agree that the state uses as its security agents the police departments through the quasi police department and the municipalities. So that's something that is agreed to as being a ward member. But outside of that, that jurisdiction is not enforceable on a state citizen. State citizen meaning a state citizen under the free national republic. Now that goes to part one of your question, the statement that you made, and I want to explain what I'm saying here. And going back to what the brother was just asking about being indigenous and aboriginal and all of that, and how to deal with them terminology and being sovereign. We are part and parcel to the government. What government? To the free national United States of America's government. The free national republic of the free national United States of America. That means that we are true national citizen of the United States of America. So that is the sovereignty, point blank, right? What that does, it gives you constitutional protections and international protections at law. To the point where it does not matter if you even have original indigenous or not. That is irrelevant. It means that the person at that point has a constitutional obligation to treat you as a free man under the greatest documents of all time, which Prophet Noble Ali called it the American Constitution. I'm going to reiterate the law enforcement code of ethics again. It says, and to respect the constitutional rights of all men to liberty, equality, and justice. So that means that you have to treat a native-born citizen the same way as a naturalized citizen. How the person became a citizen at that point is really irrelevant. So when we say we're Moors by descent. Our ancient ties really is still irrelevant at that point. The fact that we're a free national citizen at that point means that you still got the same obligation to us as you do any other citizen throughout the nation. Everybody understand that? We don't have to pick for straws to explain what type of citizen we are. Because the law is supposed to deal with equal. So when you're talking about justice, it's supposed to be based on equality. That's what the law says. So it doesn't matter if this brother is Brazilian American, he's Peruvian American, or he's Moorish American. It's irrelevant. You got to treat them all the same. So you say this person over here is a native Indian, and he's Peruvian American. It doesn't matter on whose ancestors was here first, because they all go back to the same seed, technically. But it doesn't matter on how they gained their citizenship. Under the Constitution, they are one family bearing one free national name. You got to deal with them according to that standard of law, not based off if they're Aboriginal or not, not based off if they they belong to a tribe or not. They're not sovereign because they came from over there and their forefathers came from over there. They're sovereign because they're part and parcel to the government. And that's the teachings of Drew Ali. So we don't have to run around trying to say, oh, we're Aboriginal because, you know, the Moors came from Chapter 47 over to this turf and we did this and we did that. We really don't have to get into all of that. It's irrelevant. Their law says they got an obligation to the citizens of this land. So that's what you hold them accountable to. You start trying to go somewhere else with it, you're going to get jammed up. But you're going to wind up saying something that's incorrect. And then they're going to highlight that portion of your argument and disregard everything else you said, and they're going to ride off that one statement that you said that might be convoluted. Does that make sense? Just keep it basic. Keep it as the wording, how even like I tell a lot of Moors try to get into the treaty and try to explain, you know, try to say that we get it based on the treaty and, you know, the treaty validates my status and it doesn't. Wrong, right then and there. I'm not saying that the treaty can't help some arguments. It looks good to back it up with it, but look how strong the prophet was. You can't say nothing about a treaty from 1786 that the prophet didn't know about. He did not miss no article in the treaty that you came across later or after he left. You understand what I'm saying? So if he didn't need it to declare the nation and to retrieve the flag back, if he didn't need it to retrieve the flag, why would you need it? Not saying that you don't have to make mention to it. That's not what I'm saying. What I mean, you don't have to ride off of the verbiage and the acknowledgement of the treaty to declare and to let people know who you are. Because if that was the case, you was Moors before the treaty too. And you would have been Moors even if the treaty was never signed. So although it can be helpful and useful for teaching purposes, I use it. But as far as declaration of status and really challenging citations and things, the treaty is really not necessary. It just really opens up another jurisdiction that you don't want to be in. And most of the time that you're not qualified to be in. So to me, it's really not necessary. You're not dealing with constant courts and general sessions. You don't have a consul, you don't have an embassy. So you start talking treaty law without having the full knowledge of what you're saying, they can open up a jurisdiction that you really be sitting there and you're not able to explain why you're there. And once again, the prophet was in all kinds of issues at law. And even within his teachings, he didn't necessarily use that. Look at the divine warning. He mentioned in the divine warning for the nations, The word Constitution of the United States was written over 17 times. Count. That shows you the importance of the word and the phrase and the concept. But he never made mention to the treaty. Not saying that the treaty is irrelevant and not important, but it's just not as important as what he did mention for you. You get what I'm saying? This is being a true statesman. Is what I'm trying to show you how to be pure in your position, in your status, and in your citizenship. How to be a Moorish adept is what I'm trying to show you. That you can do this with the keen understanding of the Constitution of the United States. Once you have that, you can eliminate other terminology. It's not necessary. It's just the fear in us that makes us mention a whole bunch of other stuff. And I'm showing you that because of my teacher. I'm telling you, I got this from the Prophet Noah Ali. Study what he did and what he said. Because therein is where the power lies. Their obligation is enough dealing with their constitution. That's the multilateral agreement between the citizens and their representatives. That's the strongest document on this turf. And they refer to it as the supreme law of the land. That's the only thing you need. You keen in that document, and that's where your true adeptship gonna come from. That's what's gonna save you. That's what's truly gonna save you. Your understanding of that document and where that document came from, because we know, going deeper, that is derived from ancient Muslim customary laws, which is your forefathers. That predates the treaty. That predates it. So don't run away from that document. Once you start doing that and think you need a bunch of other things, then you're going to get trapped. Your citizenship lies within understanding that document called the Constitution of the United States. That's where your citizenship lies at, and that's the only way you can protect your citizenship and defend it, and also declare it. Islam, Bridget.
Please, more. We get a lot of we're getting a lot of Moors coming into the movement, coming into this level of information. Could you speak on just what happens when they go for all these other things instead of sticking to the program that Noble Ali laid down with enforcing the Constitution? And the second part of that question is, do you know of any more individuals that were on the level of Oscar the Priest with regard to the Constitution that we should look for or read their speeches or whatever like that? Because I read some stuff from Oscar the Priest, and it's pretty mind-blowing the level that he was on from a constitutional perspective and enforcing it.
Islam. Offhand, I don't have any writings of other officers that actually put something together on the Constitution itself, as what we do from Oscar the Priest. And that's why we publicized that and put it in the newspapers, because of the importance and the elegance of that writing and his works. But I don't know anyone else besides the Prophet and Oscar the Priest that actually wrote something on the subject matter that intensive and that heavy. Outside of our current modern day Moorish leaders who go hard with it, such as Brother Taj Tariq and others like yourself, that put writing out there pertaining to the subject matter of the Constitution. But if you're talking about anybody from the days of the past, I don't know anybody offhand.
or Islam. And the first part of that was for new people coming into the movement and the teachings of Noble Drew Ali with regard to the Constitution. Why it's important to stick to that and not get into not get into the other stuff, but you know, have your priorities in order with regard to the lessons. Because a lot of people are getting caught up and jammed up, like you're saying, because they're listening to YouTube and you know they got Facebook and Instagram and people are just throwing stuff out there that have knowledge and they're losing track of where they're supposed to be with regard to the lessons to square themselves up.
Islam. Yes, you know, this is one reason why I endorse the Moorish Science Temple of America as the vehicle and an elementary entry point to Moorish consciousness here in America, is because the lesson tells us that man needs a pattern for his life. So whenever we coming into knowledge, we need some type of order or structure into doing so. And the lesson also tells us that we take Islam on in degrees. So with that being said, that unfortunately the Moorish Science Temple has not been the correct structure and formula in our past few generations that the Asiatics have been going through, because they have acquiesced and abandoned their lawful obligation between the leadership and the membership of the Moorish Science Temple. They have both abandoned their posts simultaneously. So therefore it hasn't been acting in its proper jurisdiction and capacity for the past few generations. But this is one of the reasons why we're trying to correct that and put that substance and that structure back into the Moorish Science Temple, so it can once again be the correct formula that an individual must go through for their rites of passage coming into the Moorish realm of consciousness. And within the temple doors, they should be guided in a step-by-step program on how they should conduct themselves as Moorish Americans from time of proclamation of nationality to adoption. You know, within all the steps and ranks and realms of it, they will be guided accordingly, they will be taught accordingly, and that will prevent them from bumping their heads and getting into a lot of unnecessary conflicts that we seem to get into. Some of it we get into because we are taught by Moors as more advanced, and a lot of people don't understand this too. And because a lot of our lecturers and leaders out here that holds forums and classes and a lot of YouTubes like you were just speaking about, because a lot of the information is advanced, when they listen to this, they automatically accept it as elementary and ground floor information, and they try to mimic what they're being told in the lecture, and don't understand that that individual that you're listening to might have been in this for 10 years, 5 years, 15 years, or 30. And they have went through their own experience and development and unfoldment, and that's what got them to the point where they're at today to even deliver you that information. And until you go through the trials and tribulations yourself, then you're really not going to understand how to deal with those situations. So it's good information to accept what's being told to you or what's being presented to you, but just like anything else, you take it and you investigate it. And then, you take notes on it. But you can come back to that at any time. It does not mean you have to address that right then and there. And I fault some of our lecturers for this, because this is how they guide people. And they insinuate to their listeners that this is what they should be doing. And the Prophet told us that when we're teaching a group of Moors, that we must start off by teaching them from the basic information. the basic tool as far as the questionnaire, also referred to as the 101.
Islam.
The divine constitution and bylaws. And also he made reference to several different times the Constitution of the United States of America. But see, when one is first coming into this knowledge, they have to be presented with it's got to be some type of systematic rules of entry point to this. And even for people who don't accept the jurisdiction of the temple and say, I don't deal with the temple and all that, all right, that's cool. But whatever school of thought you're dealing with, in the Moorish realm of things, you still should be presented with the same information. And usually, if they don't come in through some temple doors, what's happening is they're getting all of this other information, and they're never really directed to the basic information.
Islam.
And the basic information is still high information. I'm referring to it as basic because it's the first point of entry that you're given when you come to the temple. And it seems like it's the most mundane aspect of your Moorish encounter, but really is one of the highest levels you're going to ever get to. What we talking about now, going into the Constitution and the treaty, and we can go into articles and the acts of Congress, we can go into the treaties, we can go into the Clearfield Doctrine, we can go anywhere with this, right? And we will always view that as higher knowledge or higher science. And we can even get into metaphysics, we can go into astrology, we can go into a whole lot of information. But because it's not given into the system of the elementary point or the entry point or the initiated point of the Moor Science Temple, it's always viewed as higher knowledge. But it doesn't mean it's higher knowledge. And usually people who accept that order and go through the different other schools, they usually neglect the credentials that the Prophet gave out. And it usually makes them handicapped in their studies. A lot of Moors turn out to be brilliant into certain areas. In certain areas they become very handicapped in. For example, just quick example, Grand Sheikh, you brought to my attention the other day about a brother who was speaking negative against the Moor Science Temple of America while we on that subject. And the reason why is because of that individual's upbringing that we're speaking about. That person wasn't brought up and groomed in the Moor Science Temple. It was brought in through another entry point of Moors who were trying to keep other people away from the Moor Science Temple of America. So that individual always was biased towards Prophet Noble Ali and the Moor Science Temple of America, and never really accepted him as the founders of this pretty much general information that we're speaking about. So therefore, years later, you see it starting to manifest, where certain statements are made showing biasness towards the organization and its founder because the person never really got rooted into what the founder actually brought. Which I see this sequence all the time. All the time. All the time. And we do that, and even coming in, just as a student, we start to develop this biasness. And we start to be prejudiced to not just the Moor Science Temple, but also to the information that the Moor Science Temple puts out through its founder, Prophet Noble Ali. So therefore, a lot of Moors who never really took a seat in the Moor Science Temple, they might have this information in their database because they bought it from somebody. Or maybe their leader sold them a Holy Quran, a Moorish guide, and some literature. But really, they didn't never receive those lessons. It's a difference. And the Prophet warned us before of that in the early stages of the Moor Science Temple. He told you, buyer beware. Carry it into. And then he told you in the Quran, page 3, he says that you can receive these lessons at an expense. But they're not for sale. There's a difference. Where you can go purchase a Quran, one-on-ones, Moors, literature, anything from the Prophet, you can go purchase it with a price from an individual, and you can go home and read it. But see, now you're capacitated on your understanding of what you just was presented with. And plus the auspices on how you received it wasn't 100% correct, so therefore the vibratory rate of it is not really correct. And it's not going to open up to you the way you need it because you haven't opened it up according to how it was consecrated and the purposes and the intent on how the Prophet issued it. So that's another metaphysical level behind that most people don't understand. So beware when you just go buy something because the effect is different. So everything is not meant to be purchased the traditional way. Certain things are just not for sale, period. And what happens is when you take something out of its proper intent, what it does is it loses its integrity. Doesn't nothing happen to the information or what the information is supposed to do. It's just that when you get into that term animated, now when we start getting into avatars, the people modern day familiar with this hot term avatars, how to animate the avatars. This is ancient. And that even deals with the ancient lessons. And this is why, anciently speaking, certain lessons was only meant to be given certain ways, in certain amount of times, because things was more in harmony with more of the metaphysical realm of things. Or even today, where certain things are not meant to be introduced by man. Certain things only can be opened up on a metaphysical realm. You might have the literature right in front of you, but it's never going to open up to you by physical man. Islam. Because it wasn't meant to be for physical man to open it up to you. Same thing with the Prophet, Noble Ali, where, like he told you, he can better fight this fight on the soul plane, right? So he's still your leader. He's still your instructor. He's still your grand sheik, so to speak. But now you got to be able to be on that vibratory rate where he can be able to communicate with you. No different from your ancestors and your oracles. But if you don't know how to open up to them, then they're not going to be there for your initiation. Well, like he said, if you're not careful, you will never know that I was even there. You don't have to be here in the flesh to initiate you. So a lot of people who talk about they're in the attic chamber and all this other stuff, and they've been, some bought their way through the attic chamber. But it does not mean that they really are adepts. And even people who went through what they call an attic chamber by their instructor don't necessarily mean they're adepts. Because adept is on a whole different vibration. So because we walk around saying we adepts don't mean we adepts either. And just because we say we've been initiated and consecrated, that all comes from on high. Allah speaks to man through man, but the initiation really takes place on a higher realm. And the Prophet had just kept all of these things here, and he told you to keep the doors open. It's just a vehicle for you to be introduced to this. But he knows it's convoluted. But what he's hoping is that you at least be able to be still until he's able to reach down and pull you up and initiate you himself. And that's really what occurs in the Moor Science Temple if you just unfold into your lessons. Once you get to a certain point, then the Prophet will initiate you into the realms you need to go into. Yes, sir.
Islam, Prophet Jali said, man comprehended what he see others, what he see others do. He also said, thou knows the temper of the dreamers, thy mouth forgot the delicacy, the eyes which are the senses that watch with thee, but how they are unable to distinguish truth from error. So what that is saying is that we have to use the faculty of comprehension that Ali told us, which is our conscience, our mind. not the physical. We don't use the physical because we want physical gratification or physical remedies. Man, the physical remedy is not the answer. You know, we were trapped in this physical, so we must become spiritual. That comes to spiritual lessons. There's no job you gave. So,
Islam. Emmanuel.
Been here 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
and still, we can read the text
Mm-hmm.
in different times for years,
Mm-hmm.
and my view of it can change.
Mm-hmm.
I can see something different
Absolutely.
that I wasn't able to see before.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding of it can change for it to be different. People who receive like text, of, you know, they bought, you know, Quran, they bought the one of God, they might have read it. It's totally different from studying, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So you might have read the text, like you say, you believe that you understand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what do you put emphasis on? You can read something, you might miss something because you overlook something.
Mm-hmm.
We just recently started going to the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
The prophet, we've been reading, take your place in the affairs of man for how many years and never came into our mind that we actually attend to it. You know, like seriously.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so at the same time, we work for you, for us, you to inform us really blessed. It's time.
It's not. And like you just explained, as man unfolds, as God unfolds. So man's God today, tomorrow is not God. So what we're speaking about is what the sheet is writing on the board now, the term perception. And we're going, and I want everybody to highlight this because breaking it down is what he just verbalized. It's perception. Your perception changes. And your perception is what you perceive. And your perception also becomes your precept, which is your law. Which the law, what I told you earlier, is based on contract, right? So perception is what you agreed to. So now when we reiterate the lesson you just wrote out the Quran, just showing you how to break this down, where it says, as man unfolds, his God unfolds. Man, God today, tomorrow is not God. The reason why is because man's perception changes, which means that how he perceives himself changes, also means that his law changes by the day. And the reason why is because whatever you perceive the law to be is your God. And it's also the contract that you entered into. That you agreed for it to be the law for you. So as you unfold, your perception of your law changes. Because the perception of yourself changes. So whatever you perceive to be the law prior to, like you said, 5 years ago, last week or whatever, the reason why it's different now is because you unfolded into another perception of that very law. Which also means you change your agreements, your contracts or your covenants that you have made. This is why it's also important that we will introduce a holy covenant and an Asiatic covenant. Because now when you get into these covenants or these contracts, certain contracts is unbreakable and unchangeable. They're fixed in nature. They don't change. And some of these contracts we never had an interpretation of. So we were violating these contracts from the very beginning. This is also what the prophet was making reference to when he says we are fallen from the constitutional fold of government. The constitutional fold of government is also an agreement. It's a covenant. It's a contract. Meaning the Constitution itself is a contract. And the reason why it's a contract is because it pertains, is a contract or an agreement between two or more parties. And the parties mentioned is the citizens and its chosen representatives. So the agreement becomes between them two parties. That's what you're talking about, chosen government, chosen representative. That's what you're saying when you say republic. That's what makes you a part and parcel member or constituent of the government. That's what they say. Now you have voice, or exercise your voice. This is why voting is so important, because you're exercising your voice. Your voice is based on your agreement. So what you're doing is just validating your agreement every time you vote. Or reconfirming your agreement and your position with that. So now let's go to a metaphysical level dealing with what's occurring now. Being outside the constitutional fold of government, we don't vote. We don't understand the importance to vote. We don't know who to vote for. So now what mindset is that position I'm speaking about right now? Yes, it's the lower self, but what it stems from is not having a voice in government. But the not having a voice is based on breach of contract. You're not sure what the agreement is. That's why you don't vote. You know, when you try to get a brother to vote or a sister to vote, what they say, well, I ain't into that. I ain't voting, man, because it don't make a difference. But what they're really saying to you is, I don't know my agreement. Think of it this way. Sounds like it's totally irrelevant. But I want you to view this from a different standpoint. Because what they're saying, remember, contract is law. So when you say, I'm not voting because I'm not into that. If you're part and parcel, then that means you agreed to this government. You set this government up. The government is based on your will. Your will is expressed throughout your government. That's how it's supposed to be. So by not wanting to participate with the government, not wanting to take your place in the affairs of men, you're saying that you're not sure what your contract is. Which means you don't know what the law is. You're afraid to participate because you're not sure what your position should be. Oh, I'm not into that. Oh, it ain't going to make a difference. Or they're going to do what they want. Some people say, oh, that Constitution stuff, that belongs to them. Oh, I'm not into politics. All these responses people will give you, but it all goes right back to the same mindset of what I'm saying. They don't know themselves. You don't know yourself, you don't know the law. If your perception is not that the Constitution came from you, that means your God is still mundane. You still have your allegiance to a slaveholder, whoever they might be claiming to be. It could be the state, it could be the U.S. Whatever you claim your God to be, your God is the whatever you agree to be as your law. So whoever you got faith, you give full credit to, back to that, right? Whoever you give him full faith and credit to is your God. So whoever you are afraid of is your God. Whoever you think the law is your God. So if you think those police officers have the jurisdiction to pull you over, to stop you, to do this, to arrest you, to do this, that, and the third, if that's your perception as if that's the law and they're in the right, then they become your God. I'm not discrediting who they are. Because a man has a right to his own God. And a person has a right to their religion as well. So if that's their God, that's their religious belief, they have a right to that. So therefore, I'm not trying to change that. That's where you be. But it's irrelevant when you're talking about constitutional law. Hold on, Sharon's out his hand.
In Psalm 9, verse 28, it says, "You separate thyself, perception, knowledge of him who created."
The knowledge of him who created thee.
What else is going to do for man to know? So it's like it's tying in with everything.
Yes, absolutely. Because you are the Constitution. The written Constitution is just a mundane or reduced replica of your mind. So it was written. What was written? Your will was written. Your concept and your perception is written. So we draw, that term draw, right? We draw or bring into manifestation what's in our mind. In order for you to draw anything, there has to be a figure already formed in the mind. A design, a formula, a blueprint, a sketch, a rough draft, whatever you want to call it. It has to already exist. I don't care if you say you freestyling and you just start going like this. In order for you to do this, already has to be a command in the mind, so it already exists. Whatever's written already exists. So these are things that we're just using this is law. This is all part of law. So when you have that fear that butterflies are something that you anticipate, is because your mind already created that reality. And by you having fear of such thing that your mind created, you hold that whatever you have in your mind, it sets a precedent over everything else as superior. So you just made that God. You just made that the law because you anticipated the authority behind what you just animated. Does everybody understand that? Well, we all have that. We're human. Just like we ride down the street and sirens come behind us and somebody pulling us over. Nobody wants to be in that position, but you still have that freezing up tension within you that you don't want to be in that awkward position. But sooner or later, you have to elevate your mind from that situation and break that. Because that determines a lot of the consequences of the stop, of the effect of the stop, the outcome of the stop. That's all determined by what you have created in your mind and perception. And that's dealing with mind over matter. But it's also dealing with the perception of you and who you are. You don't have to have disrespect for the office or the station of somebody who's quasi or is acting in a demi position. You don't have to have disrespect for their station. You don't even have to expose their station. Just be yourself. Demonstrate who you are in your highest form at that moment, and you will automatically put them into check or neutralize whoever they're claiming to be. Just by you demonstrating your higher faculty puts them into where they supposed to be and where you supposed to be. But it's just like a dog. If they sense fear, then they're going to get more aggressive. And what they do is claim the jurisdiction. And then that's when their chest poke out, and then they put their hand up here, and then you already know the mindset that goes into that individual when you feed it. You know, even more as, I mean, I've read all of the literatures out there. You know, even in a patriot movement where, you know, people were taught to roll up their windows and just leave it cracked. And then you talk to them out the little side of the window and lock all the doors and you do all of that. What you have done is create fear. And regardless if you claim that you agree with them or not, you agreed with them. And you agreed that they have the jurisdiction and the power to harm you. And you created that reality. And they sensed it and they picked up on it, and now that makes them more aggressive. It's a whole psychology to that. So when you mimic those lessons, knowing that's not coming from Drew Ali or coming from on high, that's coming from another source, a few feet below. And that's going to get you in trouble. Now we know that, we got police brutality and we got all this stuff going on out there, and we know a lot of these people are corrupt. We understand that, and that's truth. A lot of them are corrupt, but all of them are not. So, you know, just deal with equality on that level. But most of your police brutality victims did not demonstrate the higher self either. So a lot of the situations, my brother Irwin always stay up when the recent demonstrations going on, look at all of them. All of them could have been prevented. Every last one of them. But see, most of them have the mentality of the black man, so-called black man that is, which is a mental state. And because of that mental state, manifests these situations to occur. So it's just like a magnet. They magnetize these situations to them by the way they act. It doesn't matter if somebody's demi or quasi or not, or somebody's de jure or not. A lot of things we bring towards our attention because our mind is not right. Even a traffic stop, where you can minimize these things if your mind is right. You can minimize the occurrence and the infractions, the violations, if your mind is right. You change the direction of your mind. I can speak on it because I used to get pulled over every other day. I know what I'm talking about. Studying the law, thinking that I knew all of the letter of the law, thinking I was superior. But because I was in that was my mind. That's what I taught every day. That's what I was dealing with. So I drew it to me. I magnetized that whole situation. My whole experience I magnetized. So I understand it. Even though I was sharp at times and I was successful, but I still created my own situations, my own battles, where a lot of them was unnecessary. To the point where I used to leave the house and knew I was going to get pulled over. But it was how I was rolling. I mean, metaphysically and physically, you got to understand what I was doing. When I left even the demi officers no choice but to exercise their job, their so-called job. I gave them no choice. And metaphysically, I gave the angelic beings no choice but to make sure I was in that position, because that's what I magnetized. To the point where now I'm in and out of court all the time. I can't deal with nothing else. I'm always fine. I'm up all night, documents, fighting this battle, suing, where that was my life. I couldn't do nothing outside of that because that's what my life story was all about. But I didn't understand myself at that time. I didn't understand myself truly. Where to this point today, I can talk about it, but really, I don't really go to court anymore, to be honest with you. Not saying that I won't, because I mean, you know, never know what occurred, but I mean, it's not my life story anymore. You know, because now I'm doing something different. You know, and that's why I tell you, without a foe, a soldier never knows his strength. So the thought must be developed by the exercising other strengths. And then the lessons also tell us where thou most weak. So we're seen as most strong. So whatever your strong point appears to be is really where you got deficiencies at. You understand? So where my reputation, I'm known for the law, right? And I'm known for, you know, at that time, like I'm telling you, this is what I was dealing with. Riding around dealing with it. Where it seemed like I was very strong in it. But it's where I needed the most work at. So I had to exercise this through opposition. To be who I say that I was really said I was at that time, I really wasn't. But I really had to demonstrate that in order for it to make sense. So it's like Allah saying, all right, well, you want to demonstrate that? You want to be like you said, you want to be sovereign? You say you got the right to travel, you say all of that? Now you're going to demonstrate that. Now I'm going to put an opposition in your way, I'm going to put a foe in your way to test you on what you sitting there teaching. Or what you say you professing in. You say you're an adept in this field? All right, the foe is going to come to you in that field. That's exactly how it works. That's how the mind magnetizes. So exactly, that's where your focus is at. So if you say you want to be a health practitioner and you are adept in holistic medicine and all of that, that's cool. But now that's where your opposition comes to. That's where your foe comes. So now your foe comes greater than the other one that you actually trying to heal on another dimension. Now you put to the greater test of that. That's how it works. No matter if it's taxes, you just name whatever category you want to name, and I bet you it'll come your way. Because that's how a victor over self becomes. Victory over self. You got to master that degree of whatever it is you're going through. This is a school of thought. So you just like you're going to go to a class, to a semester. You're going to take a course in something. Then guess what? You got to deal with it now. There's going to be quizzing, there's going to be testing, there's going to be final exams on that particular subject because that's what you're interested in. You understand? That's why you got so many Moors that's into so many different subjects and dealing with so many different degrees of human life because that's what they're interested in. So whatever they claim to be strong in is because that's their interest point. That's what they gravitated towards. So,
just to come back on what you're talking about will, and you understand will, say God said government must be a expression of the will of the people. And under Jesus' degree, we know that Jesus represents justice. He said, a man, he says, as well as a man is truth and falsehood can be mixed in his tribe. Not goes down, a man has truth about it. He also said, what is will? He said, will is the result of prayer, nothing will. It says, will is the force of Allah directed by Holy Breath. So what we're saying is that will directed by Holy Breath is truth. So if you're dealing with truth, the result of what truth represents is going to manifest. But the will that's being practiced by these people under the opposite of truth is false. And if you study, you can know. So, Islam.
Brother Oliver?
Yes.
Yes,
Finally.
Yes, sir.
I rise in your praise to Allah, the Lord of all the world. I give honor to everyone here. So, I had like 3-4 questions. One was coming back off what Chief Nico said a while ago. Said the sheriff is control over the management of his resources. First question,
Not his resources, the resources.
all resources. That's he said. Of all resources. Would that include the police departments of the county?
Yes and no. The reason why is because they're going to be the police departments. The quasi-municipal government is not going nowhere. The city is not going nowhere, right? So because it exists right now, then he should have the jurisdiction to regulate that department.
Right.
because it's in his jurisdiction. Anything go down in his jurisdiction, he's supposed to have a direct influence on dealing with the resolution of that issue.
Now, the second part was, kind of back to something you said, that the sheriff now takes his orders from the state.
Mm-hmm.
Now, would that be the governor?
Well, the state, any department of the states, and meaning that the governor is the chief commander of the particular state.
Right.
All right, so absolutely.
Okay.
Then he would take orders from the governor, absolutely.
So in cases like you were mentioning,
But the laws, I just want you to understand this, I don't want to confuse nobody. But the laws that's made or shall be made does not necessarily come from the governor's office.
right, but it trickles down that way.
Yes.
Okay, so what I want to add, in the cases like where you were telling me demonstrating your ride, you're using your marsh tags and your right to travel cars, and this and not even mentioning the responsibility of having insurance case, an accident or something like that. Would it be wise, instead of trying to argue with the police in a courtroom, to maybe take it to the governor and make him aware of such things?
No, it wouldn't be proper. The reason why is because in law, whenever you're trying to redress your grievances, you have to exhaust your remedies.
But then, weren't there really
How? I'm just speaking as a fundamental rule of thumb.
Right.
How everybody should deal with their own personal issues. So I'm not speaking on one person's issue, or whoever they might be. I'm telling you the fundamental that you have to exhaust your remedy first. Start with the sheriff's office first.
Okay, and then you go up to, like, say, the governor.
No. You let the sheriff's office do that. See, the way it works is this. You want to file a complaint on somebody that's criminal in nature.
Yeah, I didn't mean like a complaint. I mean in law passed to recognize that we are a nation and that we have our right to travel cars and what they mean.
Yeah, but that's not done through the state. That's a whole different scenario right there. And here's what I want to say to that. Remember, even though they're using the word government and state, remember, they're private now. So they're corporations appearing to be government. So don't think that they're going to do anything de jure to the point where it's going to incriminate themselves. So acknowledging us as a government or a nation is incriminating themselves. They're not going to want to do that.
They already have it.
They already have what?
They get on this and
We're not concerned with that. This is what I'm saying. Right now that they're in a corporate capacity, disguising themselves as government. System is bankrupt. We're not too much interested in the state recognizing us as a government themselves. We are part of the government, the de jure republic government, not the corporate side, not the bureaucratized side, the free national republic of the United States. We're under occupation, which we acknowledge that. But we're interested in the rebuilding process of the United States of America. That's our focus point. We're declaring who we are as Moorish Americans and our domestic activities that we do and we're doing just to get us back into the constitutional fold of the United States of America. But the United States of America is really our focus point in restoring that great republic. That's our focus point, and that's what we want people to take note of. Not that we're doing something separate or trying to be something separate. Because when you start looking at it from that perspective, and I know you don't mean this, but other people sometimes do, they're so busy trying to get autonomy for their individual nation and their individual sovereignty. What they're doing is disqualifying themselves as citizens of the United States of America. And that's the advantage point that the demos are getting when they hear that language. And they use that to disqualify the individual. And we don't want that.
You were saying that you're uncertain. I just want to say that in that one case of getting to recognition that we have the right to travel these roads without their jurisdiction.
But it's still, I understand what you're saying, and maybe it's premature for where we want people to go right now. Right now, we have so much inconsistency with people just agreeing to basic terminology and studying the right literature and understanding their correct position in the Moors Divine and National Movement. We're trying to straighten those concepts out first because we got, I mean, I don't know if you read the news or not, but you got a lot of brothers and sisters very unfortunate these days and getting jammed up out here just because they don't have the proper perception. So I'm only interested in trying to correct that. Some things is just premature to the point where we can throw it out there, but really you don't want people to run off with the misconception as what they've been doing.
Islam.
We gotta first restore this great republic. That's where you miss it. Here, let me explain it this way. No, I'm not talking about you anymore. Yeah, I'm not even talking about you anymore. I want to make this statement and just follow me. Let's just go as abroad. Although there were Moors, and we were Aboriginal, Indigenous, and all that good stuff, we derive our power from the Great Quran and all of that stuff. We go into all of the laws to validate this whole scenario. But what I want people to focus on more is the fact that we are citizens of one of the greatest forms of government and systems of government of all time. It has been perfected throughout the days of our forefathers. Just because we come from an ancient background don't mean it was all correct. This is why we in this mess we in now, because it wasn't correct. All of it wasn't incorrect, but meaning that it had its lower self issues that created karmic ties to the descendants thereof, which is us. So meaning that you can't go back into time without correcting it. If you go back into time without correcting it, then you're going to reinvent the karma. This is why the prophet made a statement. He says, when you Moors get back on top, he says, you got to treat the European right. So what I'm not trying to invoke this ancient tie with the same mentality. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand.
Meaning, I'm not talking about you, Osman. Just sit up and listen, please. What I'm saying to all of us, plural, is that your allegiance here is to the United States of America's republic form of government, which is ancient. The allegiance to that constitutional construction and what predated it, back to your divine creed. We have to be in compliance with the universal laws, peace on earth and goodwill to all men. We have to reincorporate the constitutional principles of the ancient days back into our database and be one with that. In order for this to work, we have to make our connection based on that. This is why, generally speaking, if we just reiterate the nature of the Constitution of the United States, all of these ancient fundamentals will automatically come into play because it's derived and it's rooted and it's based on that already. Islam is rooted within the Constitution of the United States. You don't even have to do anything else outside of what the Constitution is saying to be in conformity with Islamism. We put practices and customs onto it, and rituals onto it, and dress codes, and we add a lot of things to it that's all fine and dandy. But if one was just to adopt the principles into the Constitution of the United States and accept its values, they would automatically be in harmony with Islamism. Because now you're speaking one and the same. It's a peace document. It's rooted in the nature of peace. It's based on peace. So when you hear the term peace on earth, goodwill to all men, that's really the nature of the Constitution.
Islam on earth.
All you have to do is vibrate on that level in that document, the nature of the document, the perception of that document, and everything will be added onto you. Don't deviate from that. Anything we accomplish as an individual nation or coming back on top again and restoring the government, these things will happen over time. Once we adopt the fundamentals of what we're supposed to be doing. That's why we in the Moor Science Temple. That's why he said, I gave you everything it takes to save the nation. Now you gotta take what he gave you, you gotta unfold into what he gave you. You gotta first understand what he gave you. That's when we will save ourselves. So let's not put the cart before the horse and worry about things that really have no value right now. When the focus point is really obvious. The focus point is where our insufficiency is at. Is really understanding the nature of how government operates. The role of government. The structure of government. And how it's set up. These are the basic components that's necessary for each and every member. And anybody coming into this movement. That's their focus point. That's what it should be. Outside of that, they won't never understand. So
the Prophet says the peace in society depends upon justice for the happiness of individuals and the safe control of all their possessions. So keep your hearts and minds right at the end of justice needs to be right. And I only use that to say that to qualify chapter 45, the bottom to the accusations. In the reference of what Grant, he was talking about that slow and soft, high-up issues have always played out the way nationality or the system where we come from. But the object of the Moorish Americans is to know that we are a cleanly pure nation. And that the lessons that we have today are the remedies for the days of the past, offering love for humanity. Because he says that the former sons and daughters of the Asiatic nations of North America needs to learn to love instead of hate, to know of their higher self and lower self. This is uniting of the Holy Quran in Mecca for the teaching of the structure of all most American ETC. And he said the key to civilization is in the hands of the Asiatic nations, the Moors who are the ancient Moabites and the founders of the holy city of Mecca. But he lists all those nationalities and names and that we went by prior to becoming Moorish American. But within those names that we went by prior to becoming Moorish American, we didn't correct the lower self. So in order for us to correct the lower self, we need to learn instead of hate. So that means that in order for us to enforce the love instead of hate, is to learn what love is, not only come to enforcing peace, which is the highest form of this day, is the justice system, which is the Constitution. So,
thank you, Brother Aaron.
Yeah, I'm just gonna just read a couple of excerpts out of the Moorish Guide.
Can you come up closer so the camera can pick up your voice, please?
Is this better here?
A little bit further.
Now, I was just saying, I was gonna read a couple of excerpts from the Moorish Guide. One, I'm reading from the religious controversy. And the Prophet was saying the fact of the matter is that they have always had only a reflection of the truth and not the real thing. Like one who holds up to the sun a mirror and casts a few of its diverted rays in a different direction, so have they done with the truth that is supposed to have come from the east. And the second thing I want to touch on is what the Prophet defined as far as what is Islam. Because right now what I see in the world and in the news and just, they're trying to create this energy of Islam, like, oh my God, it's not a terrible thing.
They're trying to redefine.
They're trying to redefine it, right? They're trying to fleece the people. So we have to defend our religion. We have to defend our Islamism. We have to defend Islam and the Prophet. So the Prophet said, what is Islam? Islam is a very simple faith. It requires man to recognize his duties toward God Allah, his creator and his fellow creatures. It teaches the supreme duty of living at peace with one's surrounding. It is preeminently the religion of peace. The very name Islam means peace. The goal of a man's life, according to Islam, is peace with everything. Peace with Allah and peace with man. Islam. I just wanted to bring that back because we need to keep bringing this up to let this be conscious in the minds of us more. So we can defend our faith. Islam.
Thank you for that. And as I seal up, I just want to reiterate, going back to that law enforcement code of ethics. Remember, it's the code of ethics. Everybody has a code of ethics. When you start talking about our nationality is Moorish American. Moorish American has a code of ethics. It's rooted in the Constitution and bylaws of that very nation that you're talking about. We're just going quickly into Act 4. So by being Moorish American, you are part and parcel of the government and must live the life accordingly. Which means that you have an obligation, just as being a Moorish American, to certain fundamentals. Just like the brother just read about Islam. The fact that you have proclaimed your free national name and religion as being Islamism, what you're saying is, I declare and affirm that I accept the religion of peace. I accept the behavior of peace, or the code of ethics of peace. Peace on earth, peace with man, and peace with all my surroundings, is what you're really saying. It doesn't mean I'm saying I'm following these people over here, I'm ruling with this group over here, and we're going to do this, and we pray 5 times. It doesn't mean none of that. The fundamentals is what I want everyone to understand, is where the roots of all of this comes from. So that law enforcement code of ethics is not just the code of ethics for a police officer or for the sheriff. This is the law, this is the code of ethics of every individual. They're just held to a higher standard of that because they are our representatives. These are the people that we put into office to be a servant under us. So we have to hold them to a higher accountability. But don't think for a minute that this doesn't pertain to you. I just want us to know that, because I don't want us to get the attitude of trying to hold somebody else to some code of ethics that's divine and constitutional, but we ourselves are not living up to the same code of ethics. It's not. So my point is, in closing, the very first paragraph says, my fundamental duty is to serve mankind, to safeguard lives and property. So my whole statement within that is, that's no different from a Moorish American.
Wow.
Think of it this way, we've taken our place in the affairs of men. We're also holding an official capacity for some of us in the Moorish Science Temple of America. This is our office, Islam. And we have a trust here. He regained a trust for us so that we can maneuver within. So within that,
the officers of the Moorish Science Temple of America are trustees. And we gotta understand that we're held to the same code of ethics that these people say that they held to. Because these fundamentals are ancient. They come from us anyway. This is Islam, what you're reading. The code of ethics I'm talking about. Now, what your job is to do is not discredit those who are quasi from those who are de jure. That's not the focus point either. We don't want to go tit for tat and say, well, you're not constitutional. You were appointed. No, you were elected. That's irrelevant because the whole system crashed. We did too. Don't forget that. So we're both climbing back out of this bottom. Neither one of us are stations or has any integrity right now. So we don't want to start getting into pointing the finger because it can be neutralized very quick. So we don't want to get into our government versus your government and what we doing over here. You got to respect ours over here. We don't want to take that position either. Live the life accordingly, and those individuals will very quickly assume the responsibility of what they're supposed to be doing because they see that it's being done or demonstrated through you. And if they have any type of integrity in what they're demonstrating or sincerity, then they will step up their game and try to hold their office in good faith. This is why when you go to the court and you go to these meetings you've been going to, and you go there in your proper person, you see that they try every effort that they can to try to show you that they're living that way too. Now all of a sudden they want to be upright. They want to stand up, they want to be upright, give you fidelity, and they want to talk with the intelligence of the Constitution. It's because you're forcing them to demonstrate that way because they're seeing that being done within you. But when the other citizens show up and they just business as usual, they're not talking in their language, they don't have that same obligation to them. So they don't pull it out of them. So you see very quickly it's the citizens who force their representatives to do their job. So if all the citizens was demonstrating that way all the time, you'll have a more intelligent government. That's how you change it. Islam. So we're going to seal up on that. Once again, it's always a pleasure dealing with our Canaanland Moors and on Skype and joining our meetings like this. Before I seal up, do y'all have anything y'all would like to say to our class here?
There's a lot of more. We just wanted to give thanks.
Islam.
Yeah, we just wanted to give thanks for you, Morris, for setting us straight, making sure that we do things in accord with Allah and the Prophet Noble Drew Ali, and that you continue, doing the great work that you're doing to make sure that Moors get this information from the right perspective. So Islam to yourself and the staff.
Thank you.
All the Moors in attendance here. Thank you. Let's give it a hand.
Us to the fire.
Islam.
So y'all been making us do our job. So it's much appreciated.
Peace and love.
Without a fallen soldier, you never know his strength.
Islam.
So we gotta give honor to activity.
Hey, does that make us the foe?
Yeah.
Does that make us the foe?
Yes, you are the foe in a good way. Enforcing change, which is good. Sometimes we get comfortable, So we all should be each other's foes. We sit still, sharp and still. All right, Morris. So until the next time, we leave you with peace on earth and goodwill to all men.
Give thanks, family. Peace and love. I want us to do our closeout. 5 on the left, 2 on the right. Allah, the Father of the universe.
Allah, the Father of the universe.
Father of love.
Father of love.
Truth. Peace.
Freedom.
And justice.
Allah
is my protector.
Allah is my protector.
My guide.
And
my salvation.
By
night. And by day. Through his holy prophet. Noble Drew Ali. Ashe.
Rome fell.